Okay, members, we're moving to file item number 1. File item number 1. AB 1, clerk will read.
Assembly Bill 1 by Assemblymember Thurmond and others, and act relating to human services financing, making appropriation therefore.
Mr. Thurmond, you may open.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. It's an honor to rise and present AB 1. This bill provides critical services for more than 300,000 Californians who have a developmental disability, like epilepsy, cerebral palsy, and autism. It ensures that those who live with a developmental disability can be provided with employment or a day program or transportation or housing services, to name a few. The provision of these services is consistent with the greatest traditions of the Assembly, dating back to Assembly members like Frank Lanterman, Assembly members like Nick Petras. We have Assemblymember Frank Lanterman to thank for the creation of the Lanterman Act in 1977. That act guarantees and promises that anyone with a developmental disability can live the same way that anyone else would like to, with dignity and independence. And it guarantees that these services will be available for those Californians who need it. But in recent times, the promise of Lanterman has been threatened by a sluggish economy, by budget cuts, and this has meant that programs have had to close, and this has meant that those with developmental disabilities have had to go without needed services. Some providers have had to close their doors, but today we can do something to change that. And I want to tell you that as this chairman of the Budget Subcommittee on Health and Human Services, my colleagues and I heard heartbreaking testimony dating back to last year from many of the advocates who are here in this very chamber and sitting in the gallery and engaging in this conversation with us. We heard from them what those cuts have meant. We've heard from them how badly they need for these services to be restored. Passage of this bill today allows us to immediately provide more than $300 million to this great system and to restore the promise of Lanterman. Prior to my service in the Assembly, I served as a social worker. I had the opportunity to work directly at 2 different regional centers. These are the agencies that coordinate the services for people with developmental disabilities. I also had the opportunity to serve as an overnight attendant for individuals with disabilities in a supportive housing program. I can tell you from firsthand experience how important these services are to the people that we serve and to their families. We not only have the opportunity to make a significant investment in human capital, we have the opportunity to double down on our investment in California's economy, because the services that are provided are represented by 15,000 vendors and agencies that are organized throughout every part of this state and are in every assembly district. So for those reasons, I urge a yes vote on AB 1.
Thank you, Mr. Thurmond. Mr. Mathis, you're recognized.
Mr. Speaker and honorable members of the Assembly, over the last year and a half, I've been speaking to the people of my district, and I have made them a promise that I would put people over politics. Since elected, I made this promise my general principle. In the last weeks, there's been a lot of talk, discussion of the MCO tax reform package. A lot of it has been politics. In fact, most of it has been politics. We hear from some that this is a tax, and that this is a bad idea, and that we should fight the majority and the governor on this package. That would be putting politics over people. When in reality, this is reform to ensure that we meet established federal guidelines so that Californians don't lose out on services that their federal tax dollars are already paying for. It is our duty to see through the politics and our responsibility to ensure what is right for our people. Today we are empowered to keep a promise that we made to the developmentally disabled community. This community represents some of the most vulnerable of our citizens, and we must ensure that they receive the services that they need. As the father of a 9-year-old son with autism and a 1-year-old son with spina bifida, who has already had 5 surgeries and may never walk, I understand all too well the struggles that this community lives with every day. Supporting this community is putting people over politics. Keeping our hospitals open is putting people over politics. Making sure the clawback is removed so that our skilled nursing facilities can continue to provide much-needed services, especially in our rural communities, is putting people over politics. Ensuring that our most fragile, aging, and elderly patients are receiving the care that they need is putting people over politics. Protecting the jobs of tens of thousands of skilled nurses in California is putting people over politics. Unfortunately, this last Thursday, I had the experience of how devastating this could be for us when I had to take my own one-year-old daughter, Maggie, to the emergency room with a temperature of 102 that would not drop. As I sat there in a crowded emergency room with people literally standing out in the cold at night, waiting to be seen, I was terrified by the potential of one or more of our hospitals in my district closing. The lack of services would devastate my district, which is already reeling from the impact of one of the worst droughts the state has ever seen, an employment rate that is double that of the states, and the government regulations that are denying running water to thousands of citizens in my district. I cannot stand idly by and watch our hospitals close too. Nor can I stand by and watch tens of thousands of people in my district lose their health services, which is the only health care that many of them have. Members, some say this is a tax and ignore the millions of Californians and the tens of thousands of constituents in my district that will find much needed relief in this package. That would be the political move, my fellow members. But this is not a tax hike. This is tax reform that saves $100 million. But members, don't vote for this package for those reasons. Members, I ask you to put people over politics. Think of the people in your district who could lose services when your hospitals close. Think of the people in your district who will not have any form of health care. And think of the most vulnerable in your district, the members of the developmentally disabled community who have begged us for this funding. Members, think of them when you decide which button to push. I implore you to put people over politics and support this package. It is the right thing to do for the people of the state of California. I urge an aye vote.
Thank you, Mr. Mathis. Mr. Bonta, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And members, I also rise in support of AB 1. In addition to the developmental disability provisions, AB 1 also prohibits the Department of Healthcare Services from seeking to retroactively implement the Medi-Cal rate reductions and rate freezes of 2011 and 2013 for distinct part skilled nursing facilities. Distinct part skilled nursing facilities care for more medically complex patients, and rate cuts and rate freezes have threatened the financial viability of many of these facilities. It is important, of course, for these facilities to be financially stable so that they can continue to serve our constituents, especially those in rural areas. And then a quick word on the developmental disability provisions of the bill. As my colleague from Richmond so eloquently stated, AB 1 provides nearly $307 million to reform and provide improvements to developmental disability services. And I want to thank, in particular, our Speaker for her amazing leadership in making this happen. Thank you, Madam Speaker. The developmental disability system has struggled, as we know, with underfunding over the last decade, and this measure infuses our services, developmental disability services, with much needed funding and rate increases. We have heard the pleas of our developmental disability community and their families. Our developmental disability community and advocates and partners have attended hearing after hearing and passionately stated what we all know to be true, that our developmental disability community needs greater support from us and deserves greater support from us. Our developmental disability community deserves a bipartisan solution, and this is what we have before you today, members. I ask for your aye vote on this measure.
Thank you, Mr. Bonta. Mr. Mainshine, you are recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm very pleased to support AB1 here today, a part of this package that is, I think, for many of us, one of the most important pieces of all. Since 2006, programs that have served Californians with developmental disabilities have been asked to provide the same level of services while enduring over $1 billion in cuts. Furthermore, they've sat on the sidelines watching while other programs were restored. No more after today. For the first time since 2006, we will see increases to this very important community that are provided for under our state's famed Lanterman Act, an act that bound California to a promise to people with developmental disabilities and their families. This promise reflected a philosophical change in the treatment of this population, a change resulting in the beginning of closures of state-run institutions where we warehoused this population and kept them out of view behind walls. The promise of the Lanterman Act is that as we close these institutions, we promise to support people with developmental disabilities and their families, and invite them to live out in the world and our communities as our neighbors, as our friends, entitled to services that will help them live as full and as interesting lives as they possibly could. It means help in finding a place to live, play, and work, yes, work, right alongside us as integrated members of our society. I want to thank my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, and I also want to thank Governor Brown and his administration for helping to make this an important reality today.
Thank you, Mr. Mainshine. Ms. Brown, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I too rise in support of AB1. AB1 will provide an important infusion into home and institutional services for developmentally disabled people and for our larger long-term care system. San Bernardino, a place where I live, and I've lived for over 50 years, happens to house one of these regional centers, and it's been most definitely on television in the last couple of months. This bill is an important bill. As you see people come in who need these services, as you see the disabled who have just seemingly been forgotten by our community, by our state, we need to protect those with disabilities, those that are seniors, those that can't do for themselves. That's why I fight so hard for even the SSI and the SSP. As you know, 1,000 people a day are turning 65 every single day for the next 13 years. This will help this community so that some of our long-term care needs will be met. I ask for you to join me and many others, and probably 80 members, 79 members, to vote aye on this very, very important bill.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. Mr. Stone, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I know this seems like a package of bills. It's really not. And in some of the conversation about this bill was really talking about the tax cut that is now on call, and I hope that we can pass that off the floor today because that's a very, very important piece of our budget and a very, very important piece of how we deliver services. I want to remind this House, though, for this piece, the developmentally disabled piece that we're voting on next, and I'm assuming that we'll get broad consensus. I hope we will get broad consensus across this floor. But this body, the Assembly, has built this exact provision into our budget the last couple of years. This is our third opportunity to pass this. We put in our budget last year, and it got moved into the conversation here in extraordinary session in order to try and come up with a dedicated source of funding for the developmentally disabled since we have cut them so many years. What we're doing today is great, that we're putting $307 million towards those programs that have been so devastated over the last few years, but it still is a general fund expense. Our friends that we're trying to protect here are still vulnerable moving forward to the changing economics of this state, so let's not forget that. And if we had had more consensus on the budget last year and the Assembly had prevailed in funding the developmentally disabled community in our budget process last year, we wouldn't be at this point, and I would hope we would be further ahead towards building stability in how we fund the disability community. So we need to take this vote today, absolutely. But I hope that everybody that votes on this today will stay with us and be talking about a long-term, stable source of funding for the developmentally disabled. It is their civil rights. It is their civil rights under the Lanterman Act. It is our obligation to provide for the disability community, and we need to do it in a way that they're not going to be subject to the whims of the budget, revenues, expenditures as we move forward. So we're at an historic moment here on a leap day, and I hope we take advantage of that, but stay with us next year, the year after that, the year after that, the year after that, as we try and protect this very vulnerable community in California, and I urge an aye vote.
Mr. Lackey, you are recognized from your desk.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I have to tell you that prior to being elected to the Assembly and prior to even being a highway patrolman, I was a special education teacher. And right now, my heart is pounding like crazy. And it's not just because I'm speaking, but it's because I actually feel the impact that this vote that we're about ready to engage in will have on not only the people in my district, but the people throughout this state. You know, we had a rally in December where we addressed the oversight and funding for this part of our population. We had over 400 people. That I had to look in the eye and say, I'm sorry. We've let you down. You know, this population has not been a priority since the recession. This is long in coming. Our spending since that time has increased over $35 billion. But yet we've overlooked this most needy and deserving part of our population. I'm grateful that we've gotten to this point now, that we're recognizing what we've done, because we can't do anything about what has already transpired. But we're now showing some leadership. You know, people with Down syndrome, people with cerebral palsy, and other developmentally disabilities, they are a very, very meaningful part of our population. They are very much people that we represent. And we're now rising to the occasion where we can actually say, we're going to support you in your quest to live fulfilling and independent lives. Because that is the Lanterman promise that was made when I graduated from high school. It's a long time ago. We're now finally standing up and doing something that I'm very, very proud of. So I really, really would ask that you support this measure. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lackey. Mr. Cooley, you are recognized.
Colleagues, I'm thrilled to rise in support of this very important bill. I reflect upon the fact that when my wife and I were first married, moved to Berkeley, we lived on the south side of campus, and on a regular basis we walked by the center there on Telegraph for persons with disabilities. I came then to Sacramento just a year later, met John Vasilios Papin, the eldest son of my boss. Just as today we have a colleague from San Francisco looking for his first child. John Vasilios Papin had developmental disabilities. He died at the age of 21. There's actually a state building over on 9th Street with a wing dedicated to John Vasilios Papin for his courage and compassion. But John Vasilios Papin, I got to know John, and these services that he got in workshops, places where he could work and engage in productive work. His father was a state assemblyman, a powerful state assemblyman, and it so mattered to John that he was able to go to a place and show up for work and engage in productive work. I understand sort of the Lanterman Act through the lens of John Papin. And then, of course, because of my former boss's interest, year by year I had the opportunity to work on special ed legislation, autism legislation. when mainstreaming was an issue, when parents were desperate here in California to find venues in California where their children could get services, rather than send them off to places where it was reported that there was better services in a distant state. And they were looking for how to love their child, how to care for their child, how to provide for their child. And I've been to the more updated film workshops of Joey Travolta, brother of John Travolta, who has used art and film to mainstream children, to give them the experience of productive careers. So when our governor spoke here recently, he talked about keeping our long ago promises. It is an honor now to be a member, to stand with you, to support this vital way of affirming the life of every Californian, and to be a rock in the desert for those who, but for this funding, would bear the brunt of the great heat of day. We create safe spaces, protected spaces by this act, and an honor to rise in support of it.
Thank you, Ms. Cooley. Mr. Garcia, you are recognized.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. I am proud to stand up with over 80 of our colleagues in support of this bill. I think the comments that have been made have motivated me to think about the constituents that I serve in the Coachella Valley, whether it be organizations like Desert Arc, Angel View located in Desert Hot Springs, Imperial Valley Arc, who, as we know, serve some of the most vulnerable populations of California. And I think that, the comments that have been made today really go to the core of what our roles and responsibilities are as leaders for this state. We're talking about standing up for those who can't speak and stand up for themselves. And we're talking about those who we as a state made a commitment to look after. I think of the parents of those seniors with developmental disabilities. I think of the young people who cannot voice their concerns or their opinions to our legislature. And I also think of the moral and social responsibility that we have to the developmentally disabled population. I think this is reflective of what's best about California. This is what's best about the role and responsibilities that we have as legislators. And I am greatly grateful to the work that our leaders have done on AB 1. And so I respectfully ask for an aye vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Garcia. All debate having ceased, Mr. Chu, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the Chair of Assembly Human Services, I ask my colleague for your aye vote.
Thank you, Mr. Chu. Mr. Thurman, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I want to thank my colleagues. I am inspired by your comments, your wisdom, and your passion. I also want to thank my colleague from Visalia for his heartfelt words on this issue. This is a system that was built by the State Assembly. It was built by those who've graced this hall. Their names grace the bill that we speak to all the time, the Lanterman Act, which guarantees the benefits, the services, the right to live with independence and dignity. When you vote today, remember the 300,000 smiling faces who will say thank you to you for giving them the ability to do what we all want to do, to live, to love, to prosper. This gives our Californians who have a developmental disability the right to do those things, the resources to do those things. It's our system. We built it. We are in large part the only funder of this system. It is our responsibility to support our people, our Californians. We were elected to act. We have the power to act. Many who represent the 300,000 are in the galley, and I thank the leadership of both of our houses and the governor and these great advocates in the various coalitions. So let us take up our power and our authority to act, and let us give them our aye vote on AB 1.
Thank you, Ms. Thurman. With that, the clerk will open the roll. All members vote or desire to vote. All members vote or desire to vote. This is a 54-vote bill, members. All members vote or desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. Mr. Holden moves a call. Members, I am prepared to lift the call on file item number 2. The clerk will post. All members vote or desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote or desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. Close the roll. We're going to close the roll and tally the votes. Ayes 61.
Yes, 16.
Ayes 61, noes 16. Conference report is adopted. Mr. Daly, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am asking that we invoke Assembly Rule 104 and 106 and that we withhold any votes added on changes on SB 2.
The clerk will note. Members, I'm now prepared to lift the call on file item number 1. File item number 1 on call. Clerk will post. All members vote who wish to vote. All members vote who wish to vote. All members vote who wish to vote. Close the roll. Tally the vote. Ayes 78, no 0. Conference report is adopted. I'm going to close out. The second extraordinary session is adjourned under call of the Speaker. Members, back in regular session. I'm going to lift the call on file item number 12. Clerk will post. All members vote who wish to vote. All members vote who wish to vote. All members vote who wish to vote. We're going to close the roll and tally the vote. Ayes 77, no 0. Measure passes. Mr. Holden, you are recognized for your procedural motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I request unanimous consent to suspend Assembly Rule 77 and Assembly Rule 63 to allow AB 133, Budget Committee, to be taken up today without reference to file for purposes of concurrent and Senate amendments.
Ms. Waldron, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just for our members, AB 133 is identical to the bill SB 86, which we voted on, and we have the analysis, so we are in support.
Thank you, Ms. Waldron. Without objection,